Hello, and welcome to another episode of CP Talks with Trey. I'm your host, Trey Morehouse, and today we will be discussing mobility and mobility aids, as well as how cases can vary greatly from person to person. So, what are mobility aids? A mobility aid is a device that allows a person greater movement, mobility, and independence than they can achieve by themselves. Think walker, wheelchair, cane. These are all examples of mobility aids. You may think if someone uses a mobility aid like a wheelchair, they're stuck there and can't get out. If they don't do everything with their mobility aid, they don't really need it. This is not entirely true. Let's look at something more common in people's day to day life to compare. Do you wear glasses? Maybe you only need them for reading, so you only wear them when you're reading. Now I'm asking you, why can't the same logic apply with mobility aids? The same argument could be made for diversifying one's mobility aids. Perhaps you're someone who uses a wheelchair, but you can use a walker. And maybe for you, transfers are easier with a walker rather than a wheelchair. So when transferring, you use a walker, and otherwise, you use a wheelchair. If that's what works for you, then that's what you should do. Maybe you rely on both a manual and an electric wheelchair, and maybe you decide to use the manual the majority of the time, but then you use the electric when you're feeling extra tired or just don't have the energy. This is also okay. You are in control of your mobility journey, and only you can decide what that looks like. No one else should dictate your mobility needs. While we are on the subject of diversifying mobility aids, let's also discuss ambulatory wheelchair users. What is an ambulatory wheelchair user? Well, simply put, they're a wheelchair user who has the capability to stand and potentially even walk short distances, but still uses a wheelchair for longer adventures or whenever the need arises, due to a host of different reasons, some being fatigue or even pain. Just because a wheelchair user has the ability to stand and that doesn't necessarily mean they don't still need the assistance for an improved quality of life. Just like with diversifying mobility aids, the choice to not use one when the need isn't necessary, is a personal one, and it doesn't necessarily mean the person is trying to garner sympathy. They could simply be ambulatory, only needing a wheelchair in certain situations or other mobility aid. If you're unsure if someone is faking due to their ability to stand, it's better to just let it go and go on about your day. If you think someone shouldn't be using a mobility aid because they look too young or look healthy enough, just remember that disability can appear at any age, and the disabled person could be otherwise healthy. So there is no true way for you to determine if they need their aids. Again, it's better to just let it go. So remember, mobility can come in many forms, and sometimes a multitude of them. So do whatever and use whatever makes the most sense for you in the moment, because only you can decide your mobility journey. And just like with disability, mobility is not a one size fits all. Every case is different. But as always, you should speak with your doctor about your mobility needs. But in the end, only you can decide what your mobility journey looks like for you. And remember, just because somebody is using a wheelchair one day and then they use a walker the next day doesn't mean they don't need the wheelchair. It just means that their mobility may look different and maybe they have the capability of using both. Or just because somebody is able to stand, even though they're in a wheelchair, again, they could be ambulatory and have the ability to stand, but need the wheelchair for things like fatigue and being able to move longer distances. So just because somebody looks healthy enough or doesn't appear like they need it, it is always better just to ask yourself if it truly affects you. And if it doesn't, just move on and know that a person that needs a mobility aid most likely will use it when they need it. And it's okay to only use the mobility aids you need when you need them. This has been an episode of CP Talks with Trey. I'm your host, Trey Morehouse. Thank you for coming. And again, this episode is on mobility and mobility aids. Have a great day.